And now we head out to America's Radio News Newsmaker line to welcome in one of America's leading conservative commentators, a syndicated columnist, and author of Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? And up until recently, you could have seen him on MSNBC. Pat Buchanan, welcome in. How are you, sir?
Doing fine, Steve and Rachel.
Hello.
My first question to you, Pat, is why in the heck would MSNBC hire you in the first place?
Well, they hired me back there in the days when they were thinking of having a balanced network, conservative and liberal, and they put Bill Press and Pat Buchanan, formerly of Crossfire, on the air, and we did very well for 2 years until we both came out against the war. And that's not Desert Storm, that was the Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I think they probably felt at the time they needed folks more for the war.
Well, Pat, tell us why you were fired, your story, your side of the story, fired from MSNBC.
And in a word, or in a small sentence, Suicide of a Superpower is the book that got Pat Buchanan fired and Pat Buchanan blacklisted. As soon as the book came out on October 18th, there was a firestorm of protests from Color of Change, which is an African-American group, and the Human Rights Group, which is a gay rights group, and a number of liberal groups, Daily Kos and others, saying, get rid of him, get rid of him. But they never specified exactly what slur I used in there or what particular paragraph I should have redacted in the paperback. They just went after it. And I think MSNBC said, it's not what he says on the air, it's what he writes in his columns and books that has given us trouble, and we're just going to have to let him go.
You know, Pat, you've faced this kind of thing before. I remember back in the early 90s, William Buckley wrote in the National Review that it was impossible to defend you and your position on the Gulf War because at that time he thought it amounted to anti-Semitism. You've got the RNC back in 96 saying that you were headed towards a message of anger. Even Charles Krauthammer, who has appeared with you on a number of programs back in 2000, said there's no doubt that you make subliminal appeals to prejudice. And I think, it's a broad paintbrush, and maybe that section of the book about white America, which is not the entire book's premise, of course, but maybe that's something they just needed as another target to keep painting with that same brush. What would you say?
Well, I don't know that Krauthammer said this about the book, and Buckley, of course, is dead.
Yeah.
And Buckley, after he made that statement, he endorsed me in New Hampshire. But I'm going to answer him one day in a book of my own. I wouldn't do it right here. But look, the death of white America, or the end of white America is the chapter. That was a cover story in the Atlantic, the end of white America, a long essay of about 8,000 words. Bill Clinton said there'll be no majority race in America. At Portland State, everybody cheered. Frank Rich has written about 2042. The end is near, and people have written about it all over. And I've simply argued, wait a minute, fellas, why is it going to be a wonderful thing when the folks whose ancestors built this country, wrote the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and fought and bled and died in most of its wars, when they're a minority, why is that going to be a better America? And I think it's a legitimate question. And this whole idea that that arguments and ideas have to be squelched and silenced proves my point in Suicide of a Superpower, that we're reaching the point where we not only dislike each other, we don't want to hear from each other.
And you're not the only one this has happened to. Juan Williams, of course, fired from NPR because of comments he made. So you can kind of look at it as, well, you exercise your First Amendment rights, and now MSNBC is exercising their right to let you go.
Well, see, they have a perfect right to say you're off the air, or not to use me, and to let me go. But what bothers me more is these organizations that spend, 100% of their time monitoring everything written and posted and said on TV in order to suddenly seize upon it and order a demand that someone be fired, or they're going after the advertisers, or they're going after someone else. That is a blacklist. It is the traditional definition of a blacklist. People who want to have their ideological and political opponents denied the microphones, denied a hearing, taken off the air. They don't want to answer them. They want them removed from the air.
Pat, does this point to a bigger trend now that being white and Christian makes you a target, and if you defend it in any way, you're seen as a racist?
It does. And let me say something. I ran up in New Hampshire in 92 before I won the primary in 96. I won Manchester, New Hampshire. I beat the President of the United States among white working class folks because I was speaking up for their concerns, and no one else does. Now, I just see today they're going to have a big battle over affirmative action in the Supreme Court. These are the folks who are the victims of affirmative action. And they deserve a spokesman in a hearing, too. And it's not racist to say these fellas deserve an equal chance at the starting line and an equal chance at the tests. And if they win the tests and if they win the position on a team, they deserve to get it. That was the whole civil rights movement was about in its earliest days.
Pat, do you, after all this flap, do you regret any of what you wrote in that book?
Not a word. It's a fine book. It's one of the best I've written. I am proud of it. I wouldn't retract a single word. I'm not going to change a word when the paperback comes out. And if the country can't handle, after 50 years of hearing Pat Buchanan, they can't listen or hear his statements or read his books because he's so dangerous and it's so destructive to the psyche, something's wrong with the country, not Pat Buchanan.
Pat, I know you have many people chomping at the bit to get you on. What does the future hold for you now that you don't have to spend some time over at MSNBC, sir?
Well, I will say I've got friends at MSNBC. I like them. Many have defended me. Some have sent me notes privately. And so I'm not going to knock that. I enjoyed the 10 years there. I like an awful lot of those folks in front of the camera and behind it. Right now I'm sort of liberated. And I'm going to enjoy, as Mitt Romney said, he's been unemployed many times, and so I'm going to enjoy it for a little while.
All right, I'm going to ask for your expertise on tonight's debate. I know that wasn't something we were planning on covering, but quickly, how do you see the Arizona debate tonight coming out, sir?
I see Santorum under fire for his social issue statements and for the devil speech, and I think it's an opportunity for him to come blazing back. Because I do think, even though some of the stuff is pretty over the top, I think for a general election, if he's a fighting social conservative, fighting for life and his beliefs, I think that'll be very appealing to a lot of people. But that's what I would look at as the real centerpiece of the battle tonight.
Okay.
All right. Thank you again, Pat. I appreciate the time here on America's Radio News. The author of Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? Pat Buchanan, great to talk to you as always, sir.
Thank you, Rachel and Steve.